I never thought I would become the kind of person who takes detailed photographs of drainage pipes at 6 in the morning. But there I was, crouched in the mud behind my property line with my phone out, documenting what looked like an illegal discharge coming from the community center. The milky gray water flowing from a pipe I had never noticed before was headed straight into the creek that ran along the back of my land, and something about it made my stomach turn. My name is Xenakis, and I had moved to Pinewood Springs, Colorado about 8 months earlier. The subdivision seemed perfect when I bought my house, nestled in the foothills with mountain views and access to hiking trails. The HOA fees were steep at $400 a month, but the community center with its pool, gym, and tennis courts seemed worth it. What I did not know was that I was about to go to war with the most vindictive homeowners association board I could have imagined. It started on a Tuesday morning in late March. I had been out for my usual run along the creek trail when I noticed the water looked different, cloudier. There was also a chemical smell I could not quite place. I stopped and looked around, trying to figure out where it was coming from. That was when I saw the pipe, partially hidden by overgrown bushes on the community center side of the property line. Water was actively flowing from it, and it definitely was not rainwater runoff. We had not had rain in over a week. I took several photos and a short video, then continued my run, my mind spinning. I worked as an environmental consultant for an engineering firm, so I knew enough about water quality regulations to recognize that this looked like trouble. The Clean Water Act was serious business, and unauthorized discharges into waterways could result in massive fines and even criminal charges. When I got home, I pulled up the HOA's contact information and sent an email to the management company, Prestige Community Management. I kept it polite and straightforward, explaining what I had observed and asking if they were aware of any permitted discharges from the community center. I attached the photos and waited. 3 days passed with no response. I went back to check the pipe every morning, and every morning the discharge was still there. The smell was getting worse, and I noticed that the vegetation immediately downstream was starting to look sickly. On Friday, I sent a follow-up email, this time marking it urgent. On Saturday afternoon, I got a knock on my door. Standing on my porch was a woman I recognized from HOA meetings, though I had never spoken to her directly. She was in her mid-50s, with severely highlighted blonde hair and a face that looked like it was permanently fixed in an expression of disapproval. "Xenakis?" she asked, though she clearly already knew who I was. "That's me. Can I help you?" "I'm Barbara Hutchins, president of the Pinewood Springs HOA board. I understand you have been sending some concerning emails to our management company." I noticed she did not introduce herself in a friendly way or apologize for showing up unannounced. "I have been trying to get information about the discharge pipe near the community center. It has been flowing for at least a week, and whatever is coming out of it does not look good." Barbara's expression hardened. "That pipe is part of our water treatment system for the pool and spa facilities. It's perfectly legal and properly permitted. I don't appreciate your implications that we are doing something wrong." "I'm not implying anything," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I'm just asking questions. Can you provide me with the permit information? I'd like to review it." Her eyes narrowed. "That's proprietary HOA information. You don't have a right to access our operational documents just because you're curious. Actually, as a homeowner in this community, I do have a right to review HOA records, including permits and compliance documents. It's in the bylaws." Barbara took a step closer, and I could see the anger building in her face. "Mr. Xenakis, I don't know what you think you're doing, but I suggest you drop this immediately. The HOA board knows what we are doing, and we don't need some newcomer stirring up trouble. I've lived here for 8 months, and I'm not trying to stir up trouble. I'm trying to make sure we are not contaminating the creek. The creek is fine. This conversation is over." She turned and walked back to her car, a massive white Escalade that took up most of my driveway. I stood there watching her drive away, feeling a knot of anxiety forming in my chest. I had dealt with difficult clients and contractors in my job, but something about Barbara Hutchins made me genuinely uneasy. She had the look of someone who was used to getting her way and did not handle opposition well. That night, I did some research. I pulled up the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment website and started searching for permits associated with Pinewood Springs HOA. After about an hour of digging, I found what I was looking for, or rather, what I was not looking for. There was no permit on file for any discharge from the community center into any waterway. I felt my pulse quicken. If they were discharging pool water, chemicals, or any other wastewater into the creek without a permit, that was a serious violation of the Clean Water Act. The fines could be astronomical, and the EPA did not mess around with this kind of thing. On Monday morning, I called the regional EPA office in Denver. I explained the situation to a compliance officer named Derek, who sounded both interested and concerned. "Can you send me the photos and videos you took?" he asked. "And the exact location?" "Absolutely. What happens next?" "I'll forward this to our enforcement division. They will probably want to do a site visit within the next week or two. In the meantime, keep documenting what you see, but don't confront anyone or interfere with the discharge. Just observe and record." "Understood. Thank you." "No, thank you for reporting this. A lot of people see things like this and just assume someone else is handling it." I hung up feeling vindicated but also nervous. I had just essentially reported my own HOA to the EPA. There was no going back now. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA. My hands were actually shaking as I opened it. Inside was a notice of violation. According to the letter, I had failed to maintain my lawn to community standards. My garbage cans were visible from the street outside of collection hours, and I had installed a bird feeder in my backyard without architectural committee approval. I read the letter 3 times, feeling my anger rising with each pass. My lawn looked fine. I had brought my garbage cans in within an hour of collection, which was well within the allowed time frame. And there was absolutely nothing in the HOA rules about needing approval for a simple bird feeder that was not even visible from the street. This was retaliation, pure and simple. I immediately started documenting everything. I took photos of my lawn next to my neighbors' lawns, showing that mine was actually in better shape than several others on the street. I photographed my garbage area, which was neat and clean. I took multiple angles of my backyard, showing that the bird feeder was completely hidden from any public view. Then, I sat down and wrote a detailed response to the HOA, refuting each violation with photographic evidence and citations to the actual rules in the covenants. I sent it via email and certified mail, making sure I had proof of delivery. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. I had never attended one before, but I marked it on my calendar. I was definitely going now. The meeting was held in the community center, in a conference room that smelled like chlorine from the adjacent pool. When I walked in, Barbara Hutchins was already seated at the head of the table, along with 4 other board members I did not recognize. There were about a dozen other homeowners scattered around the room. Barbara's expression when she saw me could have curdled milk. "Mr. Xenakis, how nice of you to join us. I'm a homeowner. I have a right to attend." "Of course you do." Her smile was completely fake, Please have a seat. The meeting started with standard business: approval of last month's minutes, a treasurer's report, discussion of an upcoming community event. I sat quietly, waiting for the open forum portion where homeowners could raise concerns. Finally, Barbara announced, "We will now open the floor to homeowner comments. Please keep your remarks brief and relevant to HOA business." I raised my hand immediately. Barbara looked like she wanted to ignore me, but with a dozen witnesses in the room, she had no choice. "Yes, Mr. Xenakis." I stood up. "I want to discuss the discharge pipe near the community center that is flowing into the creek. I have requested permit information for this discharge and have not received any response. Under Colorado law and our HOA bylaws, I have a right to review any permits or environmental compliance documents related to HOA operations." The room went very quiet. I could see several other homeowners looking at each other with confused expressions. Barbara's face flushed red. "As I already told you, that information is not available for general distribution. The board handles operational matters." "That's not actually how it works," I said calmly. "The bylaws state that homeowners can review any HOA records within 10 business days of a written request. I made that request over 2 weeks ago." One of the other board members, a heavy-set man with a gray beard, leaned forward. "Barbara, do we have permits for the pool discharge?" "Of course we do, Richard," she snapped. "This is not something we need to discuss in open session." "Actually, I think we do," said another homeowner, a woman in her 30s sitting near the back. "I run by that creek all the time with my kids. If something is being dumped into it, we have a right to know what it is." Barbara's expression turned icy. "Nothing is being dumped. We have a state-of-the-art filtration system that occasionally needs to discharge clean water. It's completely safe and legal." "Then you should have no problem showing us the permit," I said. "This meeting is not a forum for you to harass the board," Barbara said, her voice rising. "You have made your request, and it will be handled through the proper channels. Moving on." She cut me off before I could respond, moving to the next agenda item. I sat down, frustrated but not surprised. At least I had raised the issue publicly, and I could tell that other homeowners were now aware something was going on. After the meeting, 3 different people came up to me to ask questions about what I had observed. I showed them the photos on my phone, and all of them looked concerned. "That definitely doesn't look right," said the woman who had spoken up during the meeting. Her name was Rebecca, and she lived 4 houses down from me. "My kids play in that creek sometimes, if there are chemicals in there. That's why I'm pushing for transparency," I said. "If everything is legal and safe, great, but they should be able to prove that." "Keep us posted," Rebecca said. "I think there are more people who will support you than you realize." That gave me some hope, but I knew Barbara was not going to back down easily. The next day, I got a call from Derek at the EPA. "Good news and bad news," he said. "The good news is we are sending an inspector out next Tuesday. The bad news is these investigations can take months to fully resolve." What should I expect? "The inspector will visit the site, take samples, review any available documentation. If we find violations, we will issue a notice of violation and potentially propose penalties. But the HOA will have opportunities to respond and remediate. And in the meantime, they just keep discharging. Unfortunately, unless we determine there is an imminent threat to public health, yes. But the inspection should put them on notice that we are watching." The following Tuesday morning, I made sure to be home. Around 10 o'clock, I saw an unmarked white sedan pull up to the community center. A man and a woman in business casual clothes got out, along with a third person carrying what looked like testing equipment. I watched from my window as they walked around the property, eventually making their way to the creek. They spent about 20 minutes at the discharge pipe, taking samples and photographs. At one point, Barbara Hutchins came storming out of the community center, clearly agitated. I could not hear what was being said, but I could see Barbara gesturing angrily while the EPA inspectors remained calm and professional. Eventually, they handed her some paperwork and continued their inspection. Later that afternoon, Derek called me back. "Just wanted to let you know the site visit is complete. I can't share details of our findings yet, but I can tell you this case is definitely moving forward. Thank you. I really appreciate you taking this seriously. Part of the job. Keep documenting what you see and let me know if anything changes." That evening, I got another knock on my door. This time it was Richard, the board member who had questioned Barbara during the meeting. "Aaron, can I talk to you for a minute?" "Of course. Come in." He looked uncomfortable as he stepped into my living room. "Look, I need to be straight with you. I've been on the board for 3 years, and I had no idea we didn't have proper permits for that discharge. Barbara has always handled the operational stuff, and I just assumed everything was in order." "So there really is no permit?" He shook his head. "When the EPA showed up today, Barbara had a complete meltdown. After they left, I demanded to see the permit documentation. She claimed it was in storage, then she claimed it was with the management company, then she finally admitted that we might need to update our permits. Which means you never had them in the first place. That's what it sounds like. Aaron, I'm worried about the liability here. If the EPA fines us, that comes out of the HOA reserves, which means every homeowner pays. Some of us have been trying to vote Barbara out for a while, but she has a tight grip on 2 other board members who always vote with her. What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that you keep pushing. Keep coming to meetings. Keep asking questions. The more pressure we put on this, the harder it will be for Barbara to keep stonewalling. I'll do what I can from the inside, but I need backup." "I can do that." Richard left, and I felt a shift in the dynamics. This was not just me against the HOA anymore. There were allies inside the system. Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated quickly. I received 2 more violation notices from the HOA, each one more ridiculous than the last. One claimed my house color was not within the approved palette, even though it was the exact color it had been when I bought it, and was specifically listed in the architectural guidelines. Another claimed I was parking my car on the street overnight, which was both untrue and not actually a violation according to the rules. I responded to each one with detailed rebuttals and evidence, but it was clear Barbara was trying to bury me in paperwork and potentially fine me into submission. Then, 3 weeks after the EPA inspection, I received a thick envelope from the regional EPA office. Inside was a copy of the notice of violation that had been issued to Pinewood Springs HOA. I was included as a courtesy since I had filed the initial complaint. The document was damning. The EPA had confirmed that the HOA was discharging pool water, filter backwash, and other wastewater directly into the creek without any permit or authorization. The discharge contained elevated levels of chlorine, chloramines, and other chemicals that exceeded safe limits for aquatic life. The HOA was being fined $50,000 and ordered to immediately cease the discharge and implement a proper wastewater management system. I felt a surge of vindication, but also concern. This was going to make Barbara absolutely furious, and I was the one who had triggered the investigation. Sure enough, the next day I received a notice that an emergency HOA board meeting had been called for that Saturday. The agenda listed only one item: discussion of recent EPA action and member conduct. The meeting room was packed when I arrived. Word had clearly spread through the neighborhood, and at least 30 homeowners were crammed into the space. The tension was palpable. Barbara called the meeting to order, her face tight with barely controlled rage. As many of you are aware, the EPA has issued a violation notice against our HOA based on a complaint filed by one of our residents. She looked directly at me, and several people turned to stare. This frivolous complaint has resulted in a $50,000 fine, which will have to be paid from our reserves. This means we will likely need to implement a special assessment to all homeowners to cover the cost. Thanks to Mr. Xenakis' actions, each of you may be looking at an additional fee of several $100s or more. There were murmurs around the room. Some people looked angry, but others looked confused. That's not exactly accurate, I said, standing up. The fine was not the result of a frivolous complaint. It was the result of the HOA illegally discharging contaminated water into a public waterway for years without proper permits. That water was not contaminated, Barbara shot back. It was clean pool water. Pool water contains chlorine and other chemicals that are harmful to aquatic ecosystems. That's why you need a permit to discharge it. The EPA's testing confirmed that the chemical levels were above legal limits. Rebecca stood up. Barbara, why didn't we have the proper permits in the first place? It was an administrative oversight, Barbara said dismissively. The previous management company failed to file the proper paperwork. This could have been resolved quietly if Mr. Xenakis had not gone running to the EPA like a child tattling to a teacher. I contacted the HOA first, I said, my voice rising. I sent multiple emails asking for information. You refused to provide it. You showed up at my house and told me it was none of my business. You sent me fake violation notices in retaliation. What exactly was I supposed to do? You were supposed to trust that the board had things under control, Barbara said. Richard stood up. But we didn't have things under control. Barbara, you told the board that all our permits were in order. You lied to us. Barbara's face turned bright red. I did no such thing. I said we were in compliance. Which was also a lie, Richard said. The EPA report makes it clear we have never had a permit for this discharge. That means we have been in violation for years, probably since the community center was built. Do you have any idea how much bigger the fines could have been if this had gone on even longer? A man I did not recognize stood up. I'm a lawyer, and I've reviewed the EPA notice. The HOA is actually getting off relatively easy here. The Clean Water Act allows for fines of up to $50,000 per day of violation. If they had determined this had been going on for years, we could have been looking at millions in fines. That got everyone's attention. The mood in the room shifted from anger at me to anger at Barbara. This is absurd, Barbara said. I have served this community for 7 years. I have given countless hours of my time to maintain property values and ensure this neighborhood remains a desirable place to live. And this is the thanks I get, to be second-guessed and attacked by a resident who has lived here less than a year. The thanks you should get is being removed from the board, said another homeowner. I move that we hold an immediate vote of no confidence in Barbara Hutchins as HOA president. You can't do that, Barbara sputtered. That's not how this works. Actually, it is, the lawyer said. Under the bylaws, a special vote can be called with a petition of 20% of homeowners or a majority vote of those present at a properly noticed meeting. This is a properly noticed meeting, and we have a quorum. I second the motion, Rebecca said. What followed was chaotic but ultimately decisive. After 20 minutes of heated debate, a vote was held. Barbara was removed as president by a margin of 24-6. Richard was elected as interim president, and 2 of Barbara's allies on the board resigned on the spot rather than face similar votes. Barbara gathered her things and stormed out of the room, shouting something about getting lawyers involved. But the damage was done. She had lost control. After the meeting, Richard pulled me aside. "That was intense. Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Honestly, I'm just relieved it's over." "It's not quite over yet," he said. "We still have to fix the discharge issue and figure out how to pay the fine without destroying our reserves. But at least now we can approach it honestly." Over the next few weeks, the new board worked quickly to address the EPA violations. They hired an environmental engineering firm who recommended installing a proper treatment system that would allow the pool water to be reused for landscape irrigation rather than discharged into the creek. The cost was significant, but it would actually save money in the long run by reducing water bills. As for the EPA fine, Richard negotiated it down to $30,000 by demonstrating that the HOA had immediately corrected the violation and implemented comprehensive compliance measures. The special assessment ended up being about $150 per homeowner, which was painful but manageable. I thought things were finally settling down, but then I got a call from a detective with the Douglas County Sheriff's Office. "Mr. Xenakis, this is Detective Lisa Brennan. I'd like to ask you some questions about the Pinewood Springs HOA and former board president Barbara Hutchins." My stomach dropped. "What's this about?" "We are investigating some financial irregularities. Can you come down to the station?" 2 hours later, I was sitting in an interview room, telling Detective Brennan everything I knew about my conflict with Barbara. She listened carefully, taking notes. "What kind of financial irregularities are we talking about?" I asked. When the new board took over, they started reviewing the HOA's financial records. They found evidence that Barbara had been using the HOA credit card for personal expenses. We are talking about tens of thousands of dollars over several years. Restaurants, shopping, even a vacation to Hawaii that she claimed was for a conference that doesn't appear to have existed. I felt a cold chill. So this is embezzlement. That's what it looks like. The board filed a complaint and we are building a case. Your situation is relevant because it establishes a pattern of behavior. Barbara was hiding information, retaliating against people who questioned her, and generally acting like she owned the HOA rather than being accountable to it. Happy to help however I can. The detective handed me her card. If you remember anything else or if Barbara contacts you, let me know immediately. I left the station feeling like I had stumbled into something much bigger than I realized. The discharge violation had been bad enough, but embezzlement was a whole different level. News of the investigation spread quickly through the neighborhood. It turned out that several other homeowners had been on the receiving end of Barbara's retaliation over the years, but most had just paid the fines and moved on rather than fight. One couple had even sold their house and moved away rather than deal with her. About 6 weeks after my meeting with Detective Brennan, I was working from home when I saw police cars pull up to Barbara's house, which was in a different section of the subdivision. I watched from my window as she was led out in handcuffs. The sight was surreal. This woman who had been so powerful and intimidating just 2 months ago now looked small and defeated. The charges were eventually made public. 3 counts of theft, 2 counts of forgery related to false documents she had created to cover her tracks, and 1 count of retaliation against a witness, which related to the fake violations she had sent me. The total amount of money she had stolen from the HOA was just over $87,000. The trial took place the following fall. I was called as a witness to testify about Barbara's pattern of retaliatory behavior. It was uncomfortable being in the same room with her again, but she would not even look at me. Her defense was that she had used the money for HOA purposes, and that the board had given her implicit authorization to use the credit card however she saw fit. The jury did not buy it. She was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 4 years in prison, plus restitution of the full amount stolen. The judge was particularly harsh about the retaliation charges, noting that Barbara had abused her position to punish anyone who dared to question her. Through all of this, the creek cleanup became something of a community project. Once the proper treatment system was installed and the illegal discharge stopped, several of us volunteered to help restore the affected section of the creek. We planted native vegetation, removed some of the algae that had grown due to the chemical discharge, and generally helped the ecosystem recover. The EPA did a follow-up inspection 6 months after the initial violation, and their report noted that the HOA had gone above and beyond the required remediation. The creek water quality was actually better than it had been in years. As for me, I became more involved in the HOA, serving on the Architectural Review Committee and eventually joining the board myself. Richard remained as president, and together we worked to implement more transparency measures and checks and balances to prevent future abuses of power. The whole experience taught me a lot about standing up for what is right, even when it is uncomfortable, and even when it puts a target on your back. Would it have been easier to just ignore the discharge pipe and mind my own business? Absolutely. But the creek was everyone's business and someone needed to speak up. Looking back now, 2 years later, I am proud of what we accomplished. The HOA is on solid financial footing, our environmental compliance is spotless, and the community actually feels like a community rather than a dictatorship. Property values have increased, and we have had several new families move in who specifically cited the HOA's positive changes as a factor in their decision. I still run along the creek trail most mornings, and the water runs clear now. The fish have come back, and I often see herons and other wildlife that had been absent before. It is a reminder that environmental laws exist for good reasons, and that citizen enforcement is sometimes necessary when institutions fail. The bird feeder is still in my backyard, never having required approval in the first place. The birds do not care about HOA politics, and watching them every morning is a peaceful way to start the day. Sometimes simple pleasures are the best revenge against people who tried to make your life difficult. I had coffee with Rebecca a few weeks ago, and she thanked me again for pushing the issue. Her kids still play in the creek, but now she does not have to worry about them being exposed to harmful chemicals. That alone made all the stress and conflict worthwhile. The Pinewood Springs Community Center still has its pool, gym, and tennis courts, but now the water is managed responsibly. The irrigation system fed by treated pool water has actually made the common areas look better than ever, which is an ironic twist. Barbara had fought tooth and nail to prevent any changes, insisting the old system was fine, but the new system is objectively better in every way. I occasionally wonder what Barbara thinks about all this, sitting in prison. Does she regret her choices? Does she understand that her downfall was ultimately her own doing? If she had just responded honestly to my initial email, shown me the permits or admitted they needed to get them, none of this would have happened. The cover-up and the retaliation were what turned a manageable problem into a criminal case. But people like Barbara rarely see things that way. In her mind, she was probably the victim, unfairly targeted by troublemakers who did not appreciate her service. That kind of mindset is what allows people to justify embezzlement and abuse of power in the first place. The Douglas County District Attorney used the case as an example in a public awareness campaign about HOA oversight. Apparently, HOA fraud is more common than most people realize, because board members often operate with minimal oversight and homeowners assume everything is being handled properly. The campaign encouraged residents to attend meetings, review financial records, and ask questions. I gave a couple of interviews for local news stories about the case. It felt strange being portrayed as some kind of whistleblower hero when all I had done was notice something wrong and report it. But if it encouraged other people to speak up when they saw problems, then I was happy to share my experience. One unexpected outcome was that I made some genuine friends through all of this. Rebecca and I run together most weekends now. Richard and I grab beers occasionally and commiserate about the challenges of managing an HOA, even a functional one. There is a whole group of neighbors who were brought together by the shared experience of dealing with Barbara's regime and working to rebuild afterward. The environmental engineering firm that designed our new treatment system actually asked if they could use Pinewood Springs as a case study in their marketing materials. They were impressed by how a community enforcement action had led to implementing best practices that exceeded regulatory requirements. We agreed, figuring that if our experience could help other communities avoid similar problems, that was a positive legacy. I still have all the original photos and videos I took of the discharge pipe on my phone. Sometimes I look at them and remember how nervous I was that first morning, not knowing whether I was overreacting or stumbling onto something serious. Trust your gut turned out to be good advice. The EPA inspector who did the initial site visit, whose name I eventually learned was Jennifer, told me that citizen complaints are crucial to their enforcement efforts. They do not have the resources to monitor every potential violation, so they rely heavily on people reporting problems. She said a lot of complaints turn out to be misunderstandings or minor issues, but the serious ones make the program worthwhile. In a weird way, I am grateful for everything that happened. Not for the stress or the conflict, but for what it taught me about civic engagement and standing up to bullies. Barbara Hutchins was a bully who hid behind bureaucratic authority, but she was not invincible. When enough people said no and demanded accountability, the whole house of cards collapsed. The creek is my favorite part of the property now. I have a small deck that overlooks it, and I spend summer evenings out there reading or just listening to the water. Knowing that I played a part in protecting it gives me a sense of connection to this place that goes beyond just owning property here. My parents visited last spring and could not believe the whole story when I told them. My dad, who has always been a go-along-to-get-along type of person, was actually impressed that I had taken on the HOA. I would have just paid the fines and tried to stay under the radar, he admitted. My mom was worried that I had made enemies, but I explained that most of the community had been supportive once the truth came out. The special assessment to pay the EPA fine was finalized about 18 months ago, and we actually came in under budget on the remediation work. The board voted to refund the excess back to homeowners, which was a nice surprise. I got a check for $43. It was not about the money, obviously, but it was a symbolic acknowledgement that the community had weathered the storm and come out stronger. There is still a minority of residents who think I should have handled things differently, who believe that airing dirty laundry publicly harmed the community's reputation. I understand that perspective, even if I disagree with it. Sometimes short-term embarrassment is necessary to address long-term problems. Would anyone seriously argue that we should have just kept illegally polluting the creek to avoid negative attention? The architectural committee work I do now is actually kind of interesting. I get to help neighbors with their renovation plans and make sure things stay within the guidelines while being flexible where it makes sense. It is a reminder that HOAs can serve a legitimate purpose when they are run transparently and with common sense. The problem is not the concept. It is when petty tyrants like Barbara use them as personal fiefdoms. I ran into one of Barbara's former allies on the board, a woman named Patricia, at the grocery store about a year ago. She apologized for not standing up to Barbara sooner. "I knew something was wrong, but I did not want to rock the boat," she said. "Watching what she did to you made me realize I was part of the problem by staying silent." I appreciated her honesty, and I told her that doing the right thing late is better than never doing it at all. The lawyer who spoke up during that crucial meeting, his name is Gary, eventually joined the HOA board as well. Having someone with legal expertise has been invaluable in updating our governing documents and making sure we stay compliant with Colorado HOA law, which apparently changes more often than people realize. He has been helpful in making the language of our rules clearer and less open to interpretation, which reduces conflicts. I thought about writing an article for a legal or environmental journal about the experience, but I decided against it. The local news coverage was enough exposure, and I did not want to come across as someone trying to profit from the situation. Plus, I value my privacy, and being a public figure in the HOA reform movement is not really my style. The community center pool had to be drained and deep cleaned as part of the remediation process, which meant it was closed for most of one summer. Some people complained about that, but the pool maintenance contractor who did the work said it was long overdue anyway. Apparently, Barbara had been cutting corners on maintenance to save money that she could then embezzle. The pool is in much better shape now. I got a thank you card from an elderly couple, the Johnsons, who lived downstream from the old discharge point. They had noticed that their well water had been tasting funny for a couple of years, but assumed it was just natural changes in the aquifer. After the discharge was stopped, the taste went away. They were not even HOA members since they lived outside the subdivision boundaries, but the pollution had been affecting them too. That made me realize the impact of these violations can extend beyond the immediate area. Detective Brennan told me, during a follow-up conversation, that the investigation into Barbara had actually uncovered a broader pattern of HOA fraud in the Denver metro area. Several board members from different communities were arrested in a coordinated sweep. It turned out there was almost an informal network of corrupt board members sharing tips on how to embezzle funds and cover their tracks. The whole thing was more organized than anyone expected. The restitution payments from Barbara are being garnished from her prison wages, which means it will take decades for the HOA to be fully repaid. But her house was sold as part of the judgment, and those proceeds covered about 40% of what she stole. The HOA's insurance policy kicked in for another chunk. In the end, the financial damage, while significant, was not catastrophic. I met a guy at a conference for work who had gone through something similar with his HOA in Florida. He had reported illegal tree removal in a protected wetland area, and the board had retaliated by trying to foreclose on his house over trumped-up violations. His case ended up going all the way to federal court. We swapped stories and had a good laugh about the insanity of HOA politics. It is strangely comforting to know you are not alone in these experiences. The bird feeder saga actually had a funny epilogue. During the transition to the new board, someone found the original architectural review guidelines from when the community was first built. Buried in an appendix was a specific provision encouraging homeowners to install bird feeders to promote local wildlife. Barbara had either never read it or chose to ignore it. Either way, my feeder had been explicitly allowed the whole time. I got a puppy about a year after all this settled down, a golden retriever I named Copper. Walking him along the creek trail has become a daily ritual, and it is nice to see other neighbors out doing the same thing. The community feels more connected now. People actually talk to each other instead of just living in isolated bubbles. Maybe going through a crisis together created some bonds that would not have formed otherwise. The EPA actually awarded our HOA a commendation for our remediation efforts and for implementing environmental best practices that went beyond the minimum requirements. Richard accepted it at a ceremony in Denver, and the local newspaper ran a nice article about the community's turnaround. It was a far cry from the negative coverage when the initial violations were discovered. I testified at one more trial related to the case, when one of Barbara's co-conspirators from another HOA went to court. My testimony was about the pattern of retaliation tactics they used, which were remarkably similar across different communities. That defendant also ended up convicted, and I like to think my testimony helped establish that these were not isolated incidents, but a systematic approach to corruption. Looking at my property now, it is hard to believe how much drama unfolded from one observation during a morning run. The house is still the same, the creek is still there, but the context of everything has changed. I feel invested in this community in a way I never expected when I first moved here. This is not just a house anymore. It is home. Rebecca told me recently that her daughter did a school project about the creek cleanup and won an award for it. The teacher was impressed by the civics lesson embedded in the story about how one person speaking up can lead to positive change. I met the daughter at a neighborhood barbecue, and she thanked me for saving the creek. It was adorable and also a little humbling. The HOA fees have actually gone down slightly under the new board management. We switched management companies to one that charges less and provides better service. We also cut some unnecessary expenses that Barbara had insisted were crucial, but turned out to be basically padding for her embezzlement. The community is better maintained now for less money, which proves that effective leadership matters more than big budgets. I keep the EPA commendation certificate in my home office as a reminder of the whole journey. On hard days when work is stressful or life feels overwhelming, I look at it and remember that I did something genuinely good. I helped protect a natural resource, exposed corruption, and contributed to making my community better. Those are real accomplishments that matter beyond the daily grind. The legal reforms that came out of this case have been adopted by other Colorado communities. The state legislature even passed a bill requiring more financial transparency and oversight for HOAs, directly inspired by the wave of prosecutions that included Barbara. It is strange to think that my decision to report a discharge pipe contributed to statewide policy changes, but that is how progress sometimes happens, one small action leading to larger movements. I still do my environmental consulting work, but I have developed a specialty in HOA compliance issues. Companies hire me to review their community facilities and make sure they are not creating liability risks. It has become a nice niche practice, and I get satisfaction from helping other communities avoid the problems Pinewood Springs went through. The most gratifying thing is that none of this defines me anymore. For a while, I was the guy who took down the HOA president, which was both flattering and uncomfortable. But now enough time has passed that I am just Aaron, another neighbor, someone who cares about the community but is not trying to be a crusader. That anonymity is precious. The creek still runs clear. The The birds still visit my feeder, and life in Pinewood Springs continues. The drama has faded into history, a story that old-timers tell new residents about how things used to be bad but got better. And every morning when I run past that spot where the discharge pipe used to flow, I feel a quiet sense of pride in having done the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it would have been easier to look the other way. That is the real lesson in all of this. Not the specific details about water quality regulations or HOA bylaws, but the fundamental truth that ordinary people have power when they choose to use it. Barbara Hutchins thought she was untouchable, protected by bureaucracy and apathy. She was wrong. The system worked because people made it work, because we refused to accept that illegal and unethical behavior was just the cost of living in a managed community. I hope anyone reading this who faces similar situations takes heart from my experience. Document everything, stay calm, follow proper procedures, and don't back down when you know you are right. It won't always be easy, and there will be moments when you question whether the fight is worth it. But protecting the environment, exposing corruption, and standing up for what is right is always worthwhile, even when the personal cost seems high in the moment. The view from my deck right now, as I finish this reflection, is peaceful. The creek bubbles along, completely unaware of the human drama that once surrounded it. The mountains rise in the distance, unchanging and eternal. And I sit here, grateful for this place, for the community that rallied together, and for whatever instinct made me stop and take those photos on that spring morning. Sometimes the most important decisions we make are the ones that seem small at the time but ripple out in ways we could never predict.